Yeah, thank you, Amy. And again, welcome to everybody. So my job, System Vice President for Mission Spiritual Care for Advocate Aurora, it really means that the chaplain function for our 27 hospital system reports up to me. And I'm just so proud that, to have that team and to work with them. They've done amazing work during this era of COVID in the work they've been doing, and very humbled to spend the time with you all today because of the great ministries you have been doing to support your congregations. My credentials on presenting for psychological first aid are that, I'm an ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, ordained pastor. I pastored Lutheran congregations for 5 years, first in North Dakota, then in Illinois. But about 22 years ago, transitioned into healthcare chaplaincy and have concentrated my healthcare chaplaincy work mostly, prior to coming into administration in like emergency room and critical care settings, and really specialized in trauma. My life took a detour along that way because I became a member of a critical response team for the American Red Cross that responds to mass casualty events. And with that team, I was deployed to Ground Zero in the fall of 2001 and worked as one of the chaplains in the morgue at Ground Zero. I stayed involved with the American Red Cross and deployed with them again in Katrina response. Then I left healthcare chaplaincy for a few years to work for Lutheran Disaster Response, which is the domestic disaster response program for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and directed that program for some years before returning to Advocate Healthcare and prior to our merger with Aurora and coming into spiritual care administration. While I was in disaster response, I was one of dozens and dozens of people who contributed together towards the development of the psychological first aid model. And I contributed towards the development of a field guide for faith community professionals. You're going to get a link to that, so you can take a look at that. What we're going to do today, we're going to talk about what psychological first aid is and isn't. We're going to talk about why learn it. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about resilience, because that's really the core of what psychological first aid is all about. I'll share with you who, when, and where you would use this. It has specific action principles you're going to use called prepare, look, listen, and link. We're going to distinguish between providing this for individuals and sometimes groups, and really underline communication skills, and very importantly, caring for ourselves and our congregations. And that's our agenda for today. So, what psychological first aid is. I'm going to tell you, as you're going through this course, and you're going to be hearing about things, you're going to say, isn't all this just ministry? And the answer is yes, it's really ministry. You're going to recognize it as ministry. And the reason is because, those of us that worked in contributing, building psychological first aid, we really wanted it to be something that really was just normal, intuitive, like what people do to take care of each other. You're going to recognize that we didn't really invent anything here. This is how people take care of each other in times of need. I'm maybe going to teach you a few techniques today that I learned probably working in emergency rooms, where what we do in an emergency room as a chaplain is you really provide support to people on the worst day of their life, and that's what that's about. But psychological first aid is humane, supportive, practical assistance to your fellow human beings who have suffered recent exposure to stressors and trauma. It means being non-intrusive, practical care and support, assessing needs and concerns, helping people address basic needs, even food and water, listening, but never pressuring people to talk. Gonna go into that point a lot, by the way. Listening, but not pressuring people to talk. A lot of us were actually trained on the idea that you should really sort of, not only encourage people to talk, but make people talk because it's good for them. Well, for some people that they do and they don't, and for some years in time, it is and isn't. In the immediate aftermath, when someone has gone through a traumatic event or going through a traumatic event, we don't pressure them. We let them drive on what they want to do. Some people want to talk, some people don't. That means we let the people talk who want to. We don't pressure people who don't want to. It's really about comforting people and helping them feel calm. And then really just helping connect people to information, anything that can really give them support along the way, and also protecting people from further harm. That sounds familiar, right? That's ministry. That's really what that's all about. What psychological first aid is not, okay? It's not something that only professionals can do. It was actually designed not to be done by ministers or priests or rabbis or imams or chaplains or counselors or psychologists. It was designed to be done by anybody for anybody. It's not professional counseling. It's not any kind of model of psychological debriefing you've ever heard about. We don't ask people to analyze or recount the traumatic event. We are available to listen to people, but again, never pressure them to tell their story or reactions to an event. It's also not new. You know, a lot of people say it's the new thing, right? No, it was actually developed in 1954, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, designed by the American Psychiatric Association on contract from the Department of Civil Defense. That was the precursor of FEMA back in the 50s. Designed for how neighbors would take care of neighbors emotionally and socially in the aftermath of a nuclear war. And they decided that it would promote a sense of safety, calming, self-efficacy, community efficacy, connectedness, hope. And when the model began to get designed, here's the paper that actually kind of came from it. You know, we started with that and said, all right, let's start with that. And then began to build this model that you're going to be learning today. But again, it's about people taking care of people. And you know, I do believe that social workers and psychologists and clergy can use it perhaps with a little more art than people that don't have that kind of training, because you can use it in conjunction with other skills that you have. But it really is designed for anybody to take care of it. And what's important about that, you know, what I'd say is this COVID-19 disaster we're in. And I'm going to say the COVID-19 is a disaster. It has all the hallmarks of it. In fact, it is a very unique, unprecedented series of events. It's not a moment in time. You know, 9/11 was a day that had repercussions that went on for weeks and months and years, right? Katrina was maybe a week that had repercussions of days and months and years. This is something that is going on. It has not yet come to an end, and its end is nowhere in sight. And that means the stress on our people, your people, is unprecedented. The economic hardship, the experience of illness and death, the absolutely unexperienced things that people are having around physical, emotional, and spiritual stress and anxiety. No one's been through it, and that means nobody is an expert on this. I'm not an expert on this because nobody's been through it. So psychological first aid is a starting point. I really believe that you all in your ministries are going to actually discover better ways to care for our communities. So to that end, I want to really invite you that as we're learning these action principles and techniques today, I would like you to reflect on how you can perform these actually on yourself. Everything that I'm going to teach about what you would do to take care of another person, you can actually perform these on yourself when you are in the middle of an emergency, a crisis, stressful situation, and guess what? You are in one. As you learn the action principles and techniques, you can reflect on how you can teach them to your congregants on how to use them on themselves, their families, and their neighbors. And as you learn the action principles and these techniques, really, I want you to reflect on how you can improve them to meet the needs of the times that we live in. On that second point that I want to emphasize, one of the ways that we are going to kind of get through this as people of faith and communities of faith is to realize that everybody has a need to be helped and everybody has a need to be a helper. And all of our congregants will actually be uplifted and their resilience bolstered when they all have the experience of being a helper and when they have the experience of being helped. And so again, this is about community and self-efficacy. That is one of the most powerful principles that we're going to talk about today. You know, it's really off the top of my head as I think, how would I teach psychological first aid to my congregants? You know, I believe, you know, use examples of it in sermons, for example. Talk about resilience as we're going to describe that in just a moment. Invite people to tell stories about resilient people in their lives. And as you learn these specific techniques, some of the ones I'm going to teach you, you can coach other people on these techniques. A lot of this is going to be about the de-escalation of stress and when people are very upset, understandably, in response to like the really scary stuff going on. You can not only learn those things, you can teach those things. So this is a link, by the way, to this field operations guide that I was an international expert review panel as I helped kind of create this thing. That's a link to that. You'll get a chance to take a look at that. It will really underline everything that you're learning today and help you incorporate this further into your own work. Now, before we jump into psychological first aid, I want to put a plug for another really important training if you've never had this, okay? Mental health first aid is another really important training. It's a course that gives people the skills, really of how to help someone who is developing or has a mental health problem, or is experiencing a mental health crisis. And in our congregations right now, in our faith communities right now, a lot of people are developing or already have mental health crises. And this is an important way to learn how to be of great support to them. You're taught in that class to apply a 5-step action plan on, on how to be in situations and helping someone through a panic attack, engaging with someone who may be suicidal, or assisting an individual who has overdosed. Mental health first aid is distinguished from psychological first aid in that that training is about helping people who are developing or have an existing mental health condition and how to help and minister to them in that context. Psychological first aid is about how to provide immediate support to everyone who is undergoing a traumatic event or has undergone a traumatic event. And so both are really important, and they complement each other really well. And Amy's group provides that training as well. It's outstanding, and I want to put in a plug for that. So thank you, Amy, I know, for your work in providing that for our faith community.
Thank you. And Kevin, we'll talk briefly about that, what we're offering at the end too. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Thanks so much.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to pause just a moment and just see if anybody has any questions or responses right now. And Amy, if you've read any on the bottom, if you could share those with me, or if anybody would like to do that before we jump into the actual psychological first aid modules now. Anything in there, Amy?
Nothing yet.
All right, so I invite you again, put in your questions. What I invited Amy to do is, if there's a question that really wants to be answered right away, to interrupt me, because I want to make this serve your needs. Otherwise, I'm going to have some pause points along the way to make sure we do that. But I'm talking about resilience for a moment. Okay, so what you see in that picture there, by the way, is the congregation of Peace Lutheran Church in Joplin, Missouri. Their church on a Sunday was destroyed by a tornado. You see their church in the background there? The following Sunday, there they are worshiping in their parking lot. That is a sign of resilience right there. Because resilience really is the idea that we are all deeply affected by a trauma that happens to us, our families, our communities. We are deeply affected by it. We are not necessarily defeated by it. The people of Peace Lutheran Church there, they were not defeated. They continued on with their important ministries. Their ministry of worship, by the way, there it is, unabated a week after the tornado destroyed their church. That's familiar to all of us right now, isn't it? Because even though a lot of us still have our wonderful houses of worship, we can't use them the way we've wanted to for so long. Has that put an end to your ministries? It has not. Your ministries have continued. You have continued to care for people in heroic ways, and I'm grateful to all of you. In doing so, you are showing resiliency. Resiliency is really, it's not extraordinary. We actually count on it. People demonstrate it all the time. It's the rule, not the exception. And one important thing about resiliency is it's not something that just happens to us. Resiliency is actually something that we can promote and cultivate. And that is what we're really going to be learning in the tools of psychological first aid. Again, anybody that experiences a crisis is touched by it. But that does not mean we are defeated by it. We have the ability to bounce back into a new normal. And the new normal can sometimes even be a place of greater strength and capacity than even before a crisis happened. We can foster it. And one of the goals of psychological first aid is to foster it and build it in ourselves and others. The picture you see there, by the way, is a gentleman named Dennis Norius, somebody I worked for in Lutheran Disaster Response with. And he ran a place where in the Sanford, Florida airport, after the Haiti earthquake, Haitian Americans who were choosing to be repatriated to the United States were being flown in by the Air Force and arriving at this big station, really under terrible stress, and sometimes without things they needed like car seats and stuff. And Dennis ran this center, and he greeted people and supported people. And I once said to him, I said, Dennis, it doesn't look like you're fazed by all this discovery. He says, I'm very fazed by it. But I've learned over the years that I can choose my response and promote and project a sense of calm that gives other people a sense of calm and helps them to kind of move into what they're happening. And that's what we're going to be learning today, is how to actually project that to help other people transition through a traumatic event that they're going through. So real quick, psychological first aid, for very distressed people, if you have experienced or are experiencing a stressful event, it can be for adults and children. And not everyone who experiences a crisis event really needs or wants psychological first aid, at least not right now. So we never force help on people that don't want it, aren't asking for it. We make ourselves available and accessible to people who may want that kind of support. When, it's really whenever, whenever you encounter very distressed people, as a parish clergy person, perhaps you would get a call to that somebody's having a crisis, and you go and you respond. So it's really whenever, but it can also be days or weeks after, whenever you learn about something. And one thing we try to remember, and this important thing for ministry, it's never too late to acknowledge something that you are just learning about and helping. And so if you learn about a loss that someone had, that for any reason you didn't learn about it right when it happened, it's not too late. Acknowledge it and say, I somehow didn't learn about that, and I want to offer my support to you. So that's an important learning of psychological first aid. Where it's really wherever it's safe to be, where not where someone has actually experienced a potentially traumatic event, but ideally somewhere with some privacy and the ability to preserve confidentiality and dignity. So I'm going to jump into the psychological first aid action principles, and they are prepare, look, listen, and link. Now, you see prepare is offset on that graphic just a little bit with the dotted line, and that's because psychological first aid is not a linear process. Even though you're going to be learning some things in an order, want to be clear that none of what we're going to talk about in these techniques is a linear process that you do step one followed by step two. The only thing that's a little linear is, well, prepare should come first. That you do that first. Well, I'm going to go through each of these. This is a graphic that shows them all. Again, prepare is offset that little bit because you learn about what's going on, and then look is where you're gonna learn more and observe and prioritize what's needed. Listen is going to be how you find out what people need, what they're doing, helping people feel calm. And link is going to be providing people with services. But again, as I'm about to go into each of these individually, look, listen, and link are not about doing them step by step. It's about your instincts in your ministry when you observe what is from this toolkit that this person or this family needs right now. That's where you go. That's it. But first, prepare. In a crisis, and especially like when stress is high and information is like frantic, it can be very tempting to jump in and I need to do something. I need to help. I need to serve. It is very important, especially in times of emergency, to slow down. There is always time to slow down, find out what's going on, learn about what you maybe are going to be able to bring to the situation in terms of services and supports, inventory, kind of what you've got, especially when it seems like you need to act now, is especially when you need to slow down that little bit. And just kind of a funny anecdote that I often say to chaplain students when we're training them, when chaplain students are getting trained, their instinct is, oh, if there's an emergency in the hospital, I have to get there really fast. So, code blue, we now changed the name to medical alert, but when they hear code blue and it's the chaplain's job to go to the code blue, the instinct is to run. And so what we began to train our students was, what's the first thing a chaplain should do when she hears code blue? And the answer that we would teach is this: pee. And the reason, because you don't know how long it's going to be before you have that opportunity, and we need you to arrive at that code blue scene rested, without panting and short of breath, because people time and time again always say in the middle of code blue, when I see the chaplain there and the chaplain is calm, it helps me be calm and it helps me do my job better. So the chaplain's job is to show up not upset and calm. And so that's what prepare can really do for us. Look, what's interesting about look is that look is kind of about prepare, but it's when you've arrived, now what's actually going on? What do I see? Who are the people here that seem to have the most urgent needs? It can change quickly. Time and time again, as a hospital chaplain, I'd get a call from a nurse saying, chaplain, you got to get up here. This family is freaking out. And then when I get up there, well, they're not. Maybe they were. I don't know. But now they're not. Because things can change, and people, you just need to learn now what is happening. What can I do? And begin to prioritize. Where do I want to start? And again, it's concentrating about me be calm and kind of bring to that situation what would be helpful for that. I want to pause because I want to invite also, if anyone, you've been doing ministry. A lot of people on this call, you've been doing ministry. You're not rookies at this. would anybody have any anecdotes or experiences just to kind of share, just in a brief sentence, popping into the chat or into the question, just, when you've been in that spot, kind of what it was and how did it feel? And Amy, let's pause a moment to see if anybody wants to share some of those. And Amy, if you've got some of those, you could share those as well.
Yes.
Please, I invite folks just to kind of pop in there just about an instance. It doesn't have to be a story, but it can be like what it was, what was it like? Well, I'll pause. Maybe what I'll do is I'm going to pause after each one of these action steps now to see if anybody along the way, again, if you've had experiences doing this, or you had, or have a question along the way, to be sure to kind of add that in as well. Let me move on then to listen. Listen is now you're going to engage with. You're going to engage with people, and remember, this can be people who, in the middle of a traumatic event, or an aftermath of a traumatic event, or going through a stressful time, can be exhibiting anything. There is no right or wrong way that people can be experiencing a traumatic event. People can be experiencing it by screaming and crying. People can be experiencing it by being quiet. People can be experiencing it by asking questions. That more than anything is why this part is not linear. People are going to do what they're going to do, and there is nothing right or wrong about it. So for that reason, you approach respectfully. If it's people that you don't know real well, you introduce yourself. You kind of, who am I? And you ask what you can do to help. Here's something really, really important now. I'll repeat this a couple times. When you engage someone who has been through an unexpected loss, a death, a traumatic event, any upsetting experience, when you ask the person, what is it that I could do to be of support? Whatever it is that they say, the very first thing they say, that is what you have to do. Now, you may be thinking, yeah, but I think they could use this, or they could use that, or maybe I should start with this. The reason why you ask somebody, what is it that I could do for you? And you have to do the thing that they say, is because when you have been through the loss of a loved one, a death, a traumatic event, any kind of upsetting experience, you feel out of control. And when someone then asks you what it is you could do, and they do the first thing you say, you give them that little bit of control back that helps them begin to feel that maybe things I'm gonna get through this. I'm gonna get through this. That little bit of control helps to kind of establish rapport and build a sense of reliability that you have. You can then move on to other stuff and things that you see that are important. But again, when you see things important, that I'm gonna coach you on a thing called a micro promise in a little bit. Even when you see things important, you always want to ask before you do something, because that puts the person in control. And that little bit of control helps people to kind of begin to calm down just that little bit. And staying available with them, listening to them, not pressuring them to talk, but listening, and then doing little tiny things that kind of can help them calm down just that little bit. And let me pause again right there, again, for reactions, questions, or if anybody's dropped anything into the chat or questions, Amy?
Yeah, and I was just going to comment on the idea of setting these things up and building that hospitality, that place of safety, and them feeling some level of control is so important when people are experiencing trauma.
Yeah. Anything in the chat or questions to respond to right now, Amy?
Yes. So somebody has shared, I work with military and first responders, poor and wealthy, grief and loss prevails. What should I do? How could I help? How do I help them?
Yeah, and number one for all of this, let me just underline, is always for everybody, be yourself. You're gonna adapt all of this to you. You're gonna adapt this into your ministry style. Again, you're not rookies. You've been doing stuff but really, for those folks, and I'd say especially, when you're talking about military, both current active and veterans and first responders, is very much to underline that part about let them set the agenda on how they want to respond. If they don't want to open up and tell the story of what happened, we definitely do it. We never require or ask somebody to tell the story of what happened. And a lot of times people won't. They may or may not want to. They don't need to. That's up to them. But what people are experiencing is what we invite people to kind of share, and what we respond to. For those folks, I want to really encourage you, the person who made that comment. That cadre right there, your military, your veterans, your first responders, what they respond to is presence. They don't need you to talk either. They really just want you to kind of be somebody that's going to be present with that. By the way, just on that point about you don't even need to talk sometimes, in the emergency room work, we've got a little room off the side of, in the emergency room. That's where we take people to give them bad news and things. The hospital sometimes calls that the quiet room, or the bad news room, or things like, or the family room. Among the chaplains, we sometimes refer to that room as the Center for Advanced Theological Inquiry. Because in that room, the Center for Advanced Theological Inquiry, the people in that room, they ask questions for which there are no easy answers. I went to Luther Seminary, by the way. That is a Center for Basic Theological Inquiry. And, we studied big questions, but there's always an answer for it. That's how it works. In the Center for Advanced Theological Inquiry, people ask the question why, when yelled at the top of one's lungs, is actually a prayer. And it's not a prayer, though, that wants an answer. It wants presence. And just being with people in that time frame, and sticking with them, even though it's hard to be there. We're going to talk about how it's hard to be there. That's what helps people so much. Thanks for that observation. Other chat comments or questions in there, Amy?
Yeah. So somebody asked too, so in a situation, even if somebody's trying to be well-meaning, but they're clearly being unhelpful, how do you handle something like that?
Yeah, and one thing about that, especially even as we say, psychological first aid is about, anybody helping anybody. The one thing I say why this little bit of training is helpful for people is because, we can be unhelpful in things that we do. And one of the ways that we can be unhelpful are to belittle somebody's experience, it's natural to do. Again, it's natural to do it out of any human instinct because it's hard to be there for all of us. And so when somebody's doing something sometimes that's not helpful, it's because it's hard to be there. It's uncomfortable to be there. It's hard for us. It's uncomfortable. And the very next module we'll talk about is how to be present in really uncomfortable situations. And so that's why, sometimes a little bit of training on how to kind of slow down, how to not react is really some of those. And along with that, is to be forgiving to ourselves. I've said things in ministry where I wish I hadn't said that. You know why I said it? Because I was a human being. And all of us can do that. So we want to be very kind and gentle on ourselves and others in these things. What we take as a given that everybody's doing their best. And if sometimes what we do isn't helpful, we were trying our best. But then that means maybe you can come up behind somebody and give another kind of support. Great, these are great comments. I'm really enjoying this. This is a great audience. Other stuff in there, Amy.
Yeah, and this is really timely. And the individual speaks about a chaplaincy movement that trains and helps provide care for activists. And with, so many of us taking to the streets to protest against systemic racism and police brutality, where do you see the intersection of this kind of training?
Well, that's exactly it right there. Okay, because those activists right now, what they're going through, experiencing danger, being present in the presence of high emotions and moral injury. Those folks need ministry. Those folks need support. I believe the experience that they're going to have along the way is going to be very similar to that of first responders and military experience. And it's about taking care of people. So if you've got, if you're in a place where that's happening, I follow. There's this terrific Lutheran congregation in Minneapolis that's doing amazing ministry right now. Just so proud of them. I've got a friend that is a member there, and wherever you're serving, if you've got members that are involved in that kind of work, reach out to them. Directly reach out to them and just say, hey, I want to offer you my support. Just want you to know that I'm available for you. And do the same for first responders in your congregation. And just say, what our role in the ministry is to provide the support to support to people. Really important. I am gonna move on into this next section, and then we'll pause again. And so I want to make sure we get through all the material, because the next part is specifically about now being present when it's really uncomfortable to be present. So again, there's no right or wrong response when people have been through a traumatic event, whether it's a disaster, a loss, a death, just being the overall stress of COVID. Some people are going to respond with strong emotions, even negative symptoms and reactions to those, like profound things like screaming and crying, and want to make really clear that that is normal. The job of psychological first aid and the job of ministry is not to stop people from crying. Our job is to be present with people in the midst of their very powerful reactions and things. Now, it happens that there's a thing that we call normalization. And normalization is really the intentional consolation to people that if someone is experiencing very strong, even negative symptoms and reactions to death, any kind of loss, traumatic situation, that is normal. It happens that when we are in that immediate aftermath and we're screaming and crying and being upset, those symptoms and reactions can be frightening. And a lot of people in there are actually thinking, sometimes say out loud, there must be something wrong with me that I'm doing this, especially if they see someone else not doing it. And it just happens that the intentional act of saying out loud to somebody something like, it's okay, let those tears come, you are okay. What you are feeling is normal, don't worry. That the intentional act of saying that out loud to somebody helps people be a little less self-conscious about experiencing it. And that feeling, that little less self-conscious about feeling it, helps it to kind of dissipate gradually. And on that bullet point where I say it's okay to not be okay for now, what that means is, in the immediate aftermath of something, there's no right or wrong. People should experience and emote whatever it is that they want. No one wants, however, to live in that very painful negative time, and no one in the long run does. And that's why practicing normalization and these de-escalation techniques we're going to talk are important, because it helps people, as we say, calm down. Again, it's not because we're trying to put an end to their feelings. It's because we want to help them move into a stage where they can sort of like reflect on them and be constructive inside of it. And so when we talk about de-escalating strong emotions, again, picture that you are in the presence of someone who you are with somebody right now on the worst day of their life. Okay, it's not the worst day of your life. It's the worst day of their life. Okay, and what are they doing? Whatever they want. Okay, and so your job right now is to be present with them, and just like Dennis Norius, keep a calm demeanor. And sometimes that means faking it, because you're a human being. If another person's really upset and your heart's going to start to race, your adrenaline start to go, you're a human being. Those experiences for you are normal too. So keep a calm demeanor, which sometimes means faking it again. Maintain some eye contact, not too much eye contact, because that can actually be kind of threatening. Keep and show open hands, by the way, even like an object or a pen in my hand. We're going to get to a thing called disassociation in a moment. You don't know what somebody's actually seeing when they're in that state, because their actual experience can be different than what you think it is. So keep and show open hands, because that shows that you're there in peace. Speak in a low modulated volume like I'm doing right now. Maintain your voice like this, especially even when other people are really loud and upset. It happens that when you maintain your voice in this kind of low modulated volume, other people in the room will actually begin to lower their voice to match it when they can't hear you. It doesn't always work, but I've seen it work a lot. So again, keep yourself calm and don't move quickly. And actually mimic another person's stance and position. If everybody's standing, you should stand. If everybody's sitting, try to sit. If everybody's got their arms crossed, by the way, go ahead and cross your arms, because it actually, again, establishes a little bit of rapport and makes you sort of feel like you belong there, and it makes people accept you that a little bit more. Along with that, then, remember that these people feel unsafe. They're very upset, understandably, for something terrible that has happened. give them space, stay an arm's length away, consider natural barriers. If a person who's just gotten that bad news goes and stands on the other side of a table, I let them stand on the other side of the table. I don't go over there. I don't cross the barrier, because if they've put it there for a reason, I'm gonna let it stay there for a reason. And if you're in a room full of a lot of very upset people, be alert to how to leave the room if necessary. In an emergency room, I've had a chair thrown at me, and that wasn't a bad person that did it. It was a person that wasn't having the worst day of his life. And I had to, they'll be alert to how I could kind of protect myself as well. Encourage perhaps another person to help with the calming. You know, if I come and I see a family and a lot of people are, you know, very, very upset, but one person's not, you can actually say to her, hey, your sister could use an arm. Why don't you go over and sit with her? You can encourage people to sit. You can encourage people to breathe deeply. And then, you know, this is where I want to talk about making and keeping a micro-promise. And a micro-promise is, again, is part of that self-efficacy thing, that if you're going to do something, sort of give other people the control over it before it happens. And if you're going to do something like going and getting a glass of water, and by the way, getting a glass of water is a good idea. There's something about the drinking of water that helps ground us. Say to somebody, I'm going to step out and get you a glass of water right now. I'll be back in just a moment. That's better than just going and getting a glass of water and bring it back. Because when you get the glass of water, when you say you're going to do it and then do it, bring it back, in the back of that person's mind, you have gained, again, that little bit of reliability that establishes rapport, makes them say, this is a person I can trust. Even just a little tiny thing, it builds up that relationship, that rapport, and helps that person feel like they have just that little bit of control over what's happening in the middle of this very, very out of control situation. Let me pause again right there for anything in the chat box or the question box, Amy, responses or things that people have shared.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's people have been asking some specific questions, and maybe you can address the idea of because one of the things that I think is so great about this is kind of the universality of this, and even though it's kind of an intro, but how to help students in crisis in school settings, somebody asked.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, I'm not very good. I'm not very learned at the whole thing about developmental steps. Okay, mm-hmm. You know, when in pediatric chaplaincy, we've got pediatric chaplains that are really good at that stuff. I'm not. You know, so I know I can really, you know, I can do my best work in people. I'd say even teens and older. But it's important. It's the thing to remember with students. I would say remember is that you know, a lot of times this may be the very first upsetting, traumatic thing somebody's been through, and it may or may not be, but it may be. And if it is, the person's experience of it is going to be that little bit more acute than if it's somebody who's had even a number of even one or two real losses in your life is going to be experienced very, very differently. And you know, that's why I'd say for young people, especially, and students in that context, it would be to reflect upon the fact that, you know, their world has never shown a crack in it, and now it has. That's scary, you know. So be alert to that. And that's actually then something, and almost everything, by the way, and that's is to say out loud. Anything that you think maybe choose to say out loud. So it's actually, you can say out loud to the person, I'm wondering whether it's pretty scary right now. If you've never experienced something like this right now, that's your experience the first time. If it is, just want to acknowledge that can be pretty scary. And again, almost always acknowledging out loud something that you might think, or put it in the form of a question, would be to say, tell me, is this or this? And see, you know, again, let that person be in control of that experience. Other responses on in there, Amy?
Well, and somebody just a comment, can't these, but kind of a question, can't these techniques and principles be used with people in almost any situation? Absolutely.
No, yeah, this is not about only like the worst day of somebody's life. This is about again, we're gonna talk about how this is for you as well. You know, all of the things I just talked about, de-escalation, I use those on myself, by the way, when I get sort of like a big piece of bad news that isn't even like the worst news, but like institutional news or a big change. And I guess, okay, got to take a few moments, slow down here, calm down, take some breaths, you know, and do that. You can use those for the whole continuum from normal, ordinary, run-of-the-mill stress all the way to the worst day of somebody's life. It's all together on that point. A few more reflections, Amy, that might be in
there. Sure. How to navigate tensions that might arise if you're find yourself in a situation where power dynamics are slanted in your favor. Do you acknowledge these power dynamics?
Really a really important thing to identify. Yeah, and in the same way as, as it's always the right thing to say something out loud is to acknowledge them, and remember that there are inherent power dynamics. If you are a person with a title, for example, of any title, whether it's reverend or rabbi, whatever title you've got, that is a power dynamic. Or if you're a leader in a business or something, it's to acknowledge it. And actually, I've found one important thing to do in terms of acknowledging it is also to, do what might be, appropriate sharing in terms of yourself about what you're going through to help humanize you in that experience. Not in a way to diminish what somebody else is doing it, but to kind of say, I'm also experiencing this, or I have experienced that. I'm gonna continue to move on through some of this content, and hopefully we'll get enough time to get back to a bunch more comments. Wrapping up the helping people feel calm. Something really important, as you're doing that, is that there's an experience where they describe it different ways. They can describe it saying, this feels very unreal, this feels very surreal. What that's about is a thing we call disassociation. So disassociation is that in the middle of very intense stress, and it can also happen with less intense stress that goes on for a long time, a thing called disassociation can happen. What that means is that people can begin to feel very sort of like, where somebody might say, I drove home today and I don't remember doing it. So what was that? That being on autopilot is a form of disassociation, a mild form. A less mild form would be where somebody says, I could literally see myself from a corner in the room, see myself getting the bad news. Like they're literally outside of themselves. And people may be experiencing time in their surroundings differently. Be alert to the fact that it may be happening, because sometimes it's visible and people say it, sometimes it's invisible. Be alert to the fact that it may be happening. The most profound personal experience I had with that, when I was working at Ground Zero, I had an episode where I went to buy a cup of coffee. I worked a long shift, and I felt like I was coping really well with that experience. And I went to buy my coffee with a handful of change in my pocket. And when I took out the change, all of a sudden, it's not that I couldn't do the math. I couldn't do the math, by the way. My upper brain was kind of breaking down. But for an instant, I actually didn't know what the coins represented. I literally could not remember what the little brown one was, that is 1 cent, or the big one was 25. And that moment was kind of a panic. Now, sort of a trained part of me, was able to say, oh, you're having a acute stress reaction secondary to an intense trauma you're undergoing. But the human being in me panicked and felt really, really humiliated and ashamed because I was out of control. And again, that can happen. And that could be happening to anybody that you're providing support to. Wrapping up support, just a few more techniques. In the middle there, you see one important one. If you're going to be standing or sitting with people, again, if everybody's standing, try to stand. If everybody's sitting, try to sit. Something to try to do is to create a right angle. So don't like face directly off with someone. Create a right angle, because sitting or standing with somebody at a right angle, 90-degree right angle, gives a feeling of adjacency, but does not create a feeling of confrontation. And that helps somebody feel kind of calmed down. And that's something really important to attempt to do if you get into that spot. The right middle bullet point, I want to share something. A lot of us in pastoral care training along the years were trained that, all of those traditional condolence terms, that those are just canned and those aren't genuine, and tried not to use those. Well, we were overtaught in that point, because a lot of those very traditional demonstrations of condolence they've been around for centuries, because they help us feel like we are in the experience of the mourner. I actually remember the first time after my mom died that somebody said, my deepest condolences to you. I thought to myself, wow, I'm actually a mourner. I acquired that identity, and because we're programmed with those words. Now, don't only use those words, but don't leave them out, because they actually are valuable for helping demonstrate support to people. Finally, link before I just talk about how to do this with a group. Link is about just giving people information, helping connect, helping people cope. Very importantly, helping people to help themselves and regain control of their own situation. if you're helping individual or family or a larger group, you always want to be trying to engineer things that family are doing things for the family. Anything that you can do, but if somebody else can do it, have the other person do it, including if it's the glass of water. If I say, pardon me, I'm going to step in a glass of water, you know, hand it to a family member and say, would you give this to your mom? And that puts the family into their own community and self-efficacy mode to help nurture themselves, and it reinforces that the family is here to kind of take care of themselves and each other. And I want to underline, you know, that's really for your congregations right now too. You know, that everybody will benefit by being helped, and everybody will benefit by having an experience of being a helper. And so I think as a faith community leader, be looking around for how I can like have, you know, not just do this for somebody, but ask that person to do that for somebody along with me. And that's a way that a whole community of faith can gain that feeling of efficacy and be together on that. So finally, you know, Link is just about helping people cope with their own problems. And one important part about that, a question to often ask people is, how have you gotten through a tough time in the past? Because if you reflect on that, that often helps us understand, how am I going to get through one in the future? You know, some really important things to remind people in stressful times like these is, you know, to do positive coping strategies, getting rest, eating, you know, relaxing, drinking, you know, singing, drinking water, eating, all that stuff. I say to people, be careful about alcohol. You know, I say to people, don't make changes about anything about alcohol, caffeine, or nicotine. A terrible time of stress is not a good time to quit smoking. It's also not a good time to stop. So I say, don't make changes about that. Maintain those in your life. I'm going to just really quick, I'm going to show you a couple points about doing this for a large group, and then I'll have some time to respond to questions and things. Because you're going to get these slides, and this is a roadmap for if you wanted to do a larger format support session for your faith community. And by the way, just, you know, I should have said this at the very beginning. The word psychological first aid, that's an under the hood thing. That's just our term for these skills. We don't ever say to our congregants, hey, I'm going to provide you psychological first aid, because it's really just ministry. You can see that now, right? And likewise, a group intervention with psychological first aid, we just call it a support session. You know, but the reason we might do it is because, you know, one, you can get to a lot of people at a time. And I'm going to show you a format that you can use for it if you want to. And you could do this for, I'd say, 10 or 20 people. We do this in the hospital setting as a very effective way to give people some basic information about how to get through a tough time. And so very importantly, as I show you these steps, even though I'm going to show you steps and stages, this also is not linear. As you do this with the people, just let the group go where it wants. You know, the stages that we talk about are one, you know, introduction, you know, the group sharing. We do say normalization is a really important thing, and supporting resilience. You know, I'm going to go through these quickly because our time is getting a little short, but, you know, introducing what we're doing, estimate duration. If it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, say to people what that is. This is just a chance for people to gather. Letting people kind of talk, you know, whatever they want to say. Again, it's voluntary. Nobody has to talk. Anybody's welcome to share what they want. You can introduce that sometimes, but there's no right or wrong about how to feel when we've been through like a tough time. But would anyone like to share how they feel? People share as time permits. Important thing about normalization with this is that if you hear in that group sharing time, people talking about, I can't sleep, I'm having trouble eating, keep those in mind, remember those, because then be sure to do this normalization. Say, hey, I heard somebody saying this, or says, want to underline for everybody, you know, again, that's really normal. Those are normal things to go to. And a little self-disclosure actually helps on this point too. If you can say, you know, I'll tell you that when I've been through a tough time, I actually, you know, have trouble sleeping. That is my one, by the way. Would anybody else like to share how they exhibit stress? And point out to people that in the immediate aftermath of something bad that we're going through, there's nothing wrong with these. These are normal. At whatever point they begin to bother you would be the point that you could actually seek some further attention. I want to say something to faith community leaders right now that really, if you have a pulpit, I want to ask you to do all of us a favor, and that's from your pulpit. Would you please once a year say that, hey, for everyone who may be experiencing, you know, anxiety, depression, any kind of disturbing things that are happening in your life that are making it tough to cope, I encourage you to see a mental health specialist. It's a good thing. The reason why I want everybody at the pulpit to say that is because, you know, we as a group, a career, you know, we've actually sent the opposite message. and we have to undo it. That's really important. And self-disclosure is important on that point. I'll tell you that, after I'd worked at Ground Zero, at some point I began to have nightmares every night. I went and saw a psychologist. It made a really big difference. I tell people that because there's no shame in it. There's nothing wrong with it. And we teach our congregations that that's a good thing to do as well. Resilience, again, is just uplift great things that you've seen, and make sure that you say out loud to people that you admire them, that you're proud of them, and that goes a long way. Reinforce people to connect with others, all that stuff, and be sure to practice that on yourself. Finally, before we have a few more minutes for questions, take care of yourselves, folks. Your ministries are so important. We need you to be strong and healthy, and you've been under so much stress. I'm so proud of you all. I admire you all for the tough times that you're in and the ministry that you're doing. You deserve to take care of you, because we want the best version of you available to take care of your folks. And that's why, again, all of these skills are for ourselves. We can teach them to others to use for themselves. And that together is how we kind of get through tough times. Here's a link to an online course you can take. There's an app for that. You can get them from any app store. With just a couple minutes left, Amy, any questions or thoughts that we can uplift as we still have a couple minutes?